Welcome to the Video Professor's Computer Learning Series on CD-ROM. This is the same great lesson that is found on our videotapes. This CD lesson window will always play on top of any application, so you can follow along step by step to learn the program. We have packed this CD with information, and sometimes move at a pace that is faster than you'll be able to follow along with. To help you with this, we have designed the CD to work just like a VCR. You can pause, rewind, or fast forward the CD to learn each part just by clicking the appropriate buttons. From the Table of Contents menu, you can select or review any part of this lesson instantly. For your convenience, a Video Professor icon has been added to your desktop. To view this or future lessons, simply put the CD in your drive and click on this icon to start that lesson. Now, to get started, simply click on the menu item you want to learn. For best results, we suggest you start at the first item and work your way through to the end. And welcome to my third lesson on Excel for Windows. In this lesson, we'll explore the tools that help us set up and use a database within Excel. We'll learn how to create and edit an Excel data table. As we are doing this, we'll discover how to work with functions and formulas within a data table structure. We'll also learn how to find data table records as well as sort them. By the time we finish this, you'll know how to query a data table to find records that match specific criteria. Since this is my third lesson on Excel 97, I will assume you are familiar with the skills taught in my first two lessons. If you aren't, then I strongly suggest that you view them before going any further. Before we start the lesson, I'd like to once again introduce my student assistant, Suzanne. Just follow along with her, and you'll be using the database features of this program in no time at all. Later in this lesson, we will save our work to floppy disk. It can be the disk you used in my first two lessons or a new disk. Viewers, if you haven't already turned on your computer, do so now, and then open the Excel 97 program. Before we jump into the heart of today's lesson, let's take a few moments to make sure everyone has essentially the same tools and screen view active. Pull down the View menu, and once it's open, make sure the Formula bar and Status bar are active. Reopen the View menu if you must to toggle on either of these options. Now open the Toolbar's sub-menu. For the first part of this lesson, we need only the Standard and Formatting toolbars active. Toggle them on if necessary, and toggle off any other toolbar that may be active. With that done, double-click on the percentage number that appears in the Zoom control box, and then enter 95%. We also want the Excel application window and its worksheet window maximized. If either window isn't full screen, click on its corresponding Maximize button. Now, pull down the Tools menu and select Options. When the dialog box opens, click on the View tab if it isn't already selected. On this tab, make sure you have the same options Suzanne has selected in the Show, Comments, Objects, and Windows areas. Once they are marked, click on OK. With that done, let's start our project. Suzanne, our project in this lesson is to help Josie's Gourmet Muffins, a small one-owner business, keep track of its employee records. To do that, we build a small personnel database, essentially an employee list, within Excel, and then we'll create a payroll register database to calculate the employee's pay. Both of these will contain employee names in addition to specific information related to each data list. Many of you may have heard the word database before, but perhaps weren't exactly sure what it was or how it could benefit you. Well, here's a quick overview. A database is any organized assortment of information associated with a specific topic. For example, a telephone book is a simple database that lists names, addresses, and telephone numbers. With a database, you can organize a collection of data by alphabetizing the names in a phone listing. Now let's help Josie keep track of her personnel and payroll. We already have a blank worksheet file open on screen, so let's enter a little worksheet documentation in the upper left corner. In cell A1, enter the following: Video Professor Lesson dash Personnel Database. When you finish, press your Enter key. In cell A2, type an equal sign and then the word Today. Finish the function by typing an open parentheses and a closed parentheses. When you press Enter, Excel reads the computer's clock and writes today's date into that cell. In cell C2, type in the word Personnel, and then click on the Confirm button. Personnel will serve as a title for the table. Click on the boldface icon to boldface the title. With that done, pull down the font size list and select 14 points. Before we go any further, let's save our work to disk. Suzanne, click on the Save icon. Now insert either the floppy disk from the first two lessons or a new formatted floppy disk into your system's floppy disk drive. Once done, pull down the Save In list and select the drive letter that represents your system's floppy drive. If you are using the floppy disk for the first two lessons, double-click on the Video Professor Lesson folder so you can save the file there. Below the drives list, you'll see the file name and Save As type boxes. The file type should be Microsoft Excel Workbook. If it isn't, open up the drop-down list and select it. Once that is set, double-click on the generic file name in the File Name box, and then type in Josie Data, just as you see on screen. That's all that is needed, so click on the Save button to finish the save process. Suzanne, we know what a database is supposed to do, but what does it look like? Well, many databases are organized in a relational structure which looks like tables with rows and columns of data. Each column in a data table represents a field, a unit of information such as a person's pay rate. Each row represents a record, which is all the collected information about one entity. An example would be all the information related to an employee's personnel record. Excel's worksheets are composed of rows and columns, so it's very easy to duplicate the database structure within them. Suzanne, the first data table we'll create is a company personnel list. Most companies keep employee records that include an employee's name, address, phone, Social Security number, and other such items. Each of these pieces of information can be a category, or as we say in database terminology, a field of information. Once these fields are set up, you can sort data or select records based on the information within the fields. The most important part of an Excel data table is the fields row, because it contains the categories or fields that dictate how the database is structured and what type of information can be retrieved from the data table. Let's lay the foundation for the personnel data table, Suzanne. Select cell A4, then type LName in this cell. This will be our field for employee last names. We can type field names in lower or uppercase letters, but I prefer uppercase so the names stand out a little. Suzanne, you've just created your first Excel database field. Now tab to cell B4 and type FName. We'll use this field for entering employees' first names. When you finish, tab over to cell C4 and then type in the word rate. We'll enter each employee's pay rate into this field. When you finish, tab over to cell D4 and enter the word status. This field will contain a tax deduction code for each employee. We'll indicate whether they are married or single and the number of exemptions they claim. Now tab over to cell E4, enter the abbreviation for department, DEPT, and a period. That will do for our simple personnel database. I'm sure you can think of many more fields such as address, phone, hire date, and so on. If you do, adding another field is easy. Just select or insert another column and name it for the desired field. One very important rule to remember when creating a database is that each field must have a unique name. Another important rule to remember is to initially construct your database with all the fields you might possibly need, because you can't seek information from a database if that information isn't there. You can add new fields later, but it's much easier to put them in at the beginning. Together, the fields are referred to as the fields row. And since it's critical to the structure of the data table, let's format it so it stands out from the rest of the worksheet. Select the field names row, cells A4 to E4, and then click on the boldface icon. Once that is done, open the Borders drop-down list. Once it's open, click on the full outline option that appears in the lower right corner. When you finish, click on the center align icon. Now click the mouse anywhere outside the chosen cells so we can see the formatting. Looks good. Now let's move on. I'm sure you can guess what comes next. We need to enter some employee records. Start in cell A5, the first row immediately under the field names row. Our first employee is Sam Smith, so his information will be the first record in the data table. Enter the last name Smith in cell A5. Then press the Tab key and enter Sam in the first name column. When you finish, press your Tab key and enter $7.50 an hour for Sam's pay rate. Sam is married and has 3 exemptions, so tab over to cell D5 and type M-3 in the status column. Sam is in the administration department, so tab to the department field and enter the abbreviation admin. Add a period at the end of the abbreviation. That's all you have to do, Suzanne. You've entered your first data record. All you have to do is type the information in a row, filling in each column. You can use both upper and lowercase letters to enter record data. However, it is important that your record entries follow a consistent style from one record to the next. This will make searching and sorting data faster, easier, and most importantly, more accurate. Ready for another record? If so, move down to cell A6. Our next employee is Joan Jones. Enter the last name Jones in this cell, then tab over and enter her first name, Joan. Tab again, and then enter $10 into the rate field. She is single with 1 exemption, so type S-1 in the status field. Joan is in the sales department, so enter the word sales in the department field. Even though we have entered only 2 records, you can already see the importance of the fields and row structure. It keeps data organized so information from one employee's record doesn't get mixed in with another employee's. Let's add a few more to our little data table. On screen is the employee records for Ben Miller and Misty Johnson. Enter those records into the table. Start by entering Ben's last name in cell A7. Note as you begin to enter Misty's last name, Excel automatically attempts to pre-fill the cell with Jones. Excel knows that many of your label entries will be repeats, so it attempts to enter an earlier label into the cell for you. If the pre-fill is not correct as when you are adding a new name, just keep typing and the pre-fill goes away. When you finish Misty's record, click on the Save icon to save these new records to disk. Suzanne, before we go much further, let's take a moment to look at one of Excel's database tools. Click on cell B8 within Misty's record. Now pull down the Data menu and select the Form option. Excel quickly reads the data within the page and decides, based on the structure of this data and the fact that we chose the Form option, that this block of cells must be a data table. The data form that appears on screen provides a simple way to see, change, add, and delete individual records from a data table. It can also help find specific records based on the criteria you specify. If you enter or edit data on the data form, Excel changes the corresponding cells in the data table. The upper right corner of the data form tells us how many records are in the selected data table and which records information is currently being shown in the boxes at the left side of the form. We can see Sam Smith's information listed there. Notice that each entry box represents a specific field within that field's row. If you want to see another record within the data table, just use the scroll bar to bring it into view. We'll see this dialog box again in a moment, but for now, click Close to clear it from view. Before we explore the data table any further, I want you to notice that we left a blank line between the documentation and the fields row. The blank line is needed so Excel's database tools, such as the data form, won't read the documentation as part of the data table. If there weren't a blank line, the Today function and the personnel title would be identified as the fields row. As much as we need a blank row between the document and the fields row, we don't want a blank row between the data table's records. This is very important to remember, so let's take a closer look. Whenever new data is added to a database, it needs to be connected. If we were to add the new record in a row directly below the existing list, it would be included in the data table. But if a blank row were left between the data table and the new record, that record wouldn't be included. Suzanne, let's add a new employee, but leave a blank row to see if this is true. Our new employee is Joe West. Enter his last name in cell A10. Then enter his first name in cell B10. Mr. West makes $13.50 an hour, so enter that in the pay field. Joe is married and claims 5 exemptions, so enter M-5. And he works in the sales department. The first clue that this record won't be recognized as part of the data table is the pre-fill command. It doesn't work here. Now let's see if Joe is included in the list. Click on cell B8 again, as we did a moment ago, to test the list. Now pull down the data menu and select the form command. Do you see that Excel still only sees 4 records? We know the new record has been added, but Excel doesn't recognize it as part of the data table, because there is a blank row separating it from the other records. Fortunately, that's an easy problem to correct. Right-click your mouse on the row 9 header. This highlights the row and opens a shortcut menu. Click on the shortcut menu's Delete command. Once the blank line is deleted, Joe's record becomes part of the database because the rows are contiguous now. Now that we have the personnel data table built, let's build a separate data table for payroll. In doing so, we'll see how to create and enter some very effective formulas and function commands within a data table. Before we begin building the payroll data table, let's review what type of information we want. Any business payroll, whether big or small, can be very complicated due to various deductions, such as state taxes, retirement plans, and other items related to the region or type of business. For this lesson, we will make several simplifying assumptions and keep the number of deductions down in order to focus on the database skills. We are going to create the payroll table on another sheet, so let's rename the first 2 sheets to help us keep track of our tables. Double-click on the Sheet 1 tab, and then enter Personnel as the new name for this sheet. When you finish, double-click on the Sheet 2 tab. Enter Payroll as the new name for this sheet. With that done, click on the Personnel tab to move us back to that sheet. All the fields we've set up in the Personnel data table could be appropriate for the payroll database. However, by duplicating all these fields in another table, we would be creating a certain amount of unnecessary data redundancy. A good database plan uses a minimum number of redundant fields and relies on linking and joining operations to track changes. For the payroll data table, we'll limit our duplicate fields to the name and rate fields. Suzanne, select those fields by marking the cell range A4 to C4. Once done, open the shortcut menu and select the Copy command. With that completed, move to the payroll sheet by clicking on its tab. Click on cell A4 and then use the shortcut menu to paste the field names into this page. Using this copy and paste method is the best way to duplicate fields between tables for 2 reasons. It's faster than typing, but more importantly, it assures that the field names are exactly the same in both tables. The names and the pay rate are a good start, but we also need to know how many hours an employee works during the week. Let's create that field. Select cell D4, Suzanne, and type in all caps the abbreviation for hours, the letters HR. Press your Tab key to enter this label and to move to the next column. Earnings may be calculated as regular or straight time, and may also include overtime, so we'll need fields for each of those calculations. In cell E4, type the abbreviation for regular hours, REG. Now tab over to cell F4 and then type in OT for overtime. Tab over to cell G4 and then enter the word gross. We'll use this cell to add the regular and overtime hours together to get gross total earnings. When you finish, tab over to cell H4. That takes care of the income fields. Now let's tackle a few payroll deductions. We'll only do two, one for the Social Security tax and one for income tax. This is obviously not a complete list, but you can easily add other deductions if or when you create your own payroll data file. In cell H4, Suzanne, enter FICA, and in I4, enter FIT. These are common abbreviations for the Social Security and federal income tax deductions. As you press the Tab key to get to the next cell, the window automatically scrolls over. Finally, in cell J4, enter net for net pay, the much smaller take-home pay you get after all the deductions are taken from gross earnings. Suzanne, before we do anything else, let's apply the formats from our copied fields to these new field headers. Click on cell C4 to select the rate field. Now click on the Format Painter icon. Remember, it's the one with a paintbrush just right of the paste icon. Suzanne dragged the Format Painter across the new field names, cells D4 to J4. When you release the mouse button, the Format Painter applies the copied formats to the selected area. It doesn't, however, put a borderline on the right edge of cell J4. It's a little confused, so we need to finish the border ourselves. Click on cell J4, and then open the Borders palette. When it opens, select the right side border to close off the edge. We've got a fairly comprehensive list of payroll headings. Now let's quickly put a title above this table to remind us what it's for. Select cell B2 and then type Payroll Register. A payroll register is the name given to this kind of form, where payroll is calculated for each employee on each payday. Click on the check mark, then on the boldface icon. Now that this table has a structure, let's put some employee data into it. Suzanne, click on the Personnel tab. We're going to copy the employee names and their pay rates into the Payroll tab. Now block cells A5 to C9 to mark the employee names and their pay rates. Once done, use the shortcut menu to copy the data. Click on the Payroll tab. Suzanne used the bottom scroll bar to bring column A into view, and then click on cell A5 to mark the corner of the paste area. With that accomplished, access the shortcut menu and select the Paste command. There, that saves a bit of typing and ensures that our record information is duplicated properly. Before we go any further, click on the Save button again. Our next step in today's lesson is creating formulas and functions that calculate payroll. We can easily write a formula to multiply the pay rate, but that's only half the problem. We also need some way to decide when overtime should be paid. Generally, any hours in excess of 40 per week must be paid at a premium, usually at 1.5 times the regular hourly rate. To help us with this problem, we'll use the if function. It's a logical function that evaluates data for a true or false condition and then calculates accordingly. The if function begins with an equal sign to indicate a function. Then comes the name of the function, followed by arguments or variables enclosed in parentheses. The if function contains 3 arguments. The first argument sets up the condition to be evaluated for true or false. The second is a formula for the true result. And the third is a formula for the false result. Suzanne, the logical choice for our first if function is in the first row under the regular pay field. So select cell E5. To help us create our first if function, we'll use the function wizard. Its icon is just right of the sum function icon. Click on it. The function wizard contains all the pre-made functions within Excel and helps us step through the function creation process. Suzanne, click on the top category choice in the left window. This window allows us to select from a number of function categories such as financial, date and time, statistical, and logical functions. Each category contains a number of functions related specifically to that category. Press your down arrow key. As each function category is highlighted, we are given a new set of functions in the right window. The if function we want to create is a logical function, so click on that choice. We are now given a list of all the functions available in the logical category. And from this list, click on the if function name. As soon as you select that function name, Excel displays at the bottom of the dialog box the structure of this function and its purpose. The function wizard will help us write each part of the function. Click on the OK button, Suzanne. This step of the function wizard breaks out each part of the if function. The first is the logical test. For our payroll problem, the condition within the regular pay field should test whether the hours entered here are more than 40 or not. The first thing we need to do is select the cell that represents the hours cell within the first record. We can type cell addresses directly into the wizard box, or we can use the cell selection buttons attached to the right side of each entry box. For the first selection, we'll use the cell selection button. Click on it, Suzanne. The function wizard disappears to allow us to select a cell. Click on cell D5. Type the greater than sign. Once that's in place, type the number 40. You'll notice that the first part of this function appears in the formula bar area 2. We now have the condition to be tested, so let's create a formula to calculate the pay if that condition is true. Press Enter to finish the logical test. When the wizard reappears, press your Tab key to move on to the next entry box. For the true condition, we need to tell Excel to multiply the pay rate by only 40 hours. The straight time pay, nothing above or below 40 hours. Type in the cell address for the first record's pay rate, C5. Type an asterisk, and then type in the number 40. With that done, press Tab to move on to the third box. This is where we describe the action taken if the condition is false. That is, if the hours entered are less than or equal to 40. For this case, we simply multiply rate times actual hours. Type in C5, which is the cell address for the first record's pay rate. Type an asterisk and then type D5, which is the cell address for the record's hour field. Look at the value the wizard has calculated. The logical test is false for this record since we don't have any hours data in the table yet. If it were true, the answer would be $300, 40 hours times $7.50. Since it is false, the answer is 0. Suzanne, click on the OK button or press your Enter key. Look closely at the function displayed in the edit line. There are no spaces anywhere, and the three parts of the if function are separated by commas. Now let's test the formula, Suzanne. You should have a 0 in cell E5 since there are no hours in cell D5 yet. Click in the hours cell D5 and enter 40. Look, regular pay is $300, just as the wizard predicted. Enter 35 hours in cell D5. Good. The regular pay went down to $262.50, which is the correct figure for 35 hours at $7.50 an hour. I think we can trust this formula to calculate part-time and straight-time pay. But let's see what it does with hours in excess of 40 hours. Enter 45 hours in cell D5. Given the rate of pay plus the time and a half pay for the 5 overtime hours, Sam should have net income of $356.25. However, our regular pay if function won't calculate pay for more than 40 hours, so we are only given $300, 40 hours times $7.50. To pay Sam's overtime, we must create an if function that pays work hours in excess of 40. Click in cell F5, Suzanne. And this time, let's write the function without using the function wizard. Type the equal sign and the word if and an open parentheses. The condition to be tested is the same as the first if function, whether hours are greater than 40. Type D5, followed by a greater than sign, then 40. With that done, type a comma to end this argument. This time, if the condition is true, we will pay only the excess hours. So we must subtract 40 from the hours in D5 and then multiply those hours by the pay rate times 1.5. This gives the time and a half pay premium. Type an open parentheses, then D5, a minus sign, 40, and a close parentheses. Now type an asterisk and another open parentheses, then type C5 for the rate cell, another asterisk, 1.5, a close parentheses, and finish it with a comma. Whew, that was quite a formula. Well, the third argument won't be quite that hard. If the condition is false, then there is no overtime pay. Type in a 0 and finish the entire function with a closed parentheses. With that finished, press the Enter key. With 45 in the hours cell, regular pay is $300, and the overtime in cell F5 is $56.25. The formula works. 5 times 7.5 times 1.5 equals $56.25. If you have an error indicator in this cell, check the edit line to make sure the function has commas between the three arguments, an equal number of open and closed parentheses, and that there are no spaces between any of the elements. If your formula is incorrect, select cell F5 and correct the function on the edit line. We know the function works for overtime, but what if there is no overtime? Enter 39 hours in cell D5, Suzanne. It works. Sam no longer gets any overtime pay. We can easily copy these functions down for the other records, but before we do, let's write the remaining formulas for this row, and then we'll copy everything at once. Gross pay is the next one in the row. Click in G5, Suzanne, and type an equal sign. This is going to be a simple formula for a change. We just need to add regular pay to overtime pay. Click in cell E5. Type a plus sign, then click in cell F5. Press Tab when you finish. It's now time to tackle those pesky payroll deductions. We can't cover all of them in this lesson, so we'll look at two of the big deductions, FICA and FIT. FICA tax is a percentage of gross pay. In fact, there are two different FICA taxes, and there are also some maximum pay conditions where you could use another if function. We don't want to get that complicated in this lesson, so we'll create a simple formula that will deduct a straight percentage of gross income. Type in an equal sign. Now click on the gross pay cell G5 and type an asterisk. The total FICA rate is 7.65%, so type 0.0765 after the asterisk and press Tab. The FIT, or federal income tax, comes from a table. So we'll skip that deduction for now and tab over to net pay. Net pay is simply gross pay minus all the deductions. Type an equal sign to start the formula, then click on cell G5, gross pay. Type a minus sign, then click on cell H5. Type another minus sign and click on cell I5. Then press Enter. Suzanne selects cell J5 again. Now click on the currency style icon to apply that format to this cell. When we copy the functions and formula cells down to other rows, their formatting will be copied too. Before we finish our formatting, let's make the columns a little smaller so we can see more of the spreadsheet at once. Click and drag your mouse pointer across column headers I to B. We'll leave the last name and net income cells as they are. Position your mouse on any column divider so it turns to a two-sided arrow. Once it does, pull that arrow over to the left until the cell area displays 7 characters in width. Before going any further, let's erase the test hours in Sam Smith's record. Click in D5 and press the Delete key. With that done, we're ready to copy these formulas and functions down into the other records. Select the range E5 to J5, then use the fill handle to copy these formulas down to rows 6 through 9. Suzanne, now that we have a data table set up with almost all the necessary formulas to calculate payroll, all that remains is to enter the hours for this pay period, and then enter the proper income taxes to be withheld. Click in cell D5, Suzanne, and enter 39 for Sam Smith. Press Enter to move down to the next record and enter 42 for Jones, 40 for Miller, 41 for Johnson, and 30 for Smith. Given their respective earnings, the following income taxes according to federal income tax tables should be entered in column I. 10 for Smith, 51 for Jones, 41 for Miller, 41 for Johnson, and 6 for West. That's it. Once the formulas are set up, the actual payroll calculations are done instantly. Sam Smith's net income should be $260.12. Joan Jones' net income should be $346.11. Viewers check these and the net incomes for the rest of the employees against your results. If the results differ, stop the lesson so you can check your formulas, functions, and enter data. Suzanne, so far we've seen how to create a simple data table and a more complex table using formulas and if functions. We've also learned how to use the data form. Let's extend those skills one step further by adding a second pay period to the payroll data table. When we finish, we'll have enough data in this table to do some interesting queries. Suzanne, our little data table has all the essential ingredients but one, the pay date. Let's add that field to our data table. I think the best place to add that field would be between the hours and the regular pay columns. Right-click on the column E header to select the space for a new column to be inserted. When the shortcut menu opens, click on the Insert command. Now click in cell E4 and type in the field name Date. Then press Enter. For our payroll data table, let's use June 9th, 1998 as the start date. To enter this date into the first set of records, simply click on cell E5 and then type in 6/9/98.
Professor, how does this date differ from the today function we entered at the beginning of the lesson?
It's pretty simple, Suzanne. The today function, which we are using for the spreadsheet documentation, always displays the current date. It changes each day. However, when you type in a specific date, it doesn't change. Suzanne used the fill handle to copy this date into the other records.
Professor, I think we need to do something else here. I have a series of dates, not a copy.
Remember, Suzanne, the fill handle's main operation is to create a series based on the information within the active cell. That's why we got a sequence of dates instead of copies. We can, however, use the fill handle to copy data. Let's see how that's done. Click on E5. Now hold down the Control key while using the fill handle to highlight cells E6 to E9. When you release the mouse button, the date is copied into the highlighted cells. A little quicker than using the copy and paste commands, isn't it? Now let's add that second pay period to our data table. And let's add a slight twist to this by changing the pay for one of our employees. To make this permanent, we need to record the rate increase with the Personnel table. Click on the Personnel tab to move back to the first page, Suzanne. Now select cell C7 and enter $9. Ben Miller has improved his sales skills and earned a raise to $9 an hour. Now mark the range A5 to C9. Once it is selected, use the shortcut menu and click on the Copy command. Click on the Payroll tab. Once there, use the bottom scroll bar to bring column A into view. Now right-click on cell A10 and then click on the shortcut menu's Paste command. There you are, Suzanne. The 5 employees are listed and ready to have their next payroll calculated. Notice that Ben Miller's new pay is reflected in the new set of records, but his pay rate remains the same for the June 9th payroll. If the payroll and personnel tables were linked together, this rate would have changed too. With that accomplished, select cell E10. The new date for this payroll period is June 16th, 1998. Enter that date into E10. Then use the Control key and fill handle method to copy the date into the remaining cells. Once done, select cells F9 to K9. Then use the fill handle without the Control key to copy the functions and formulas into the new records. This process automatically copied the same federal withholding in all the new records, so your next step is to enter the correct income tax. Click in cell J10 and enter 12 for Sam Smith, 46 for Jones, 53 for Mr. Miller, 37 for Miss Johnson, 30 for West. Now let's add the hours for this pay period. Starting in cell D10, enter 40 hours for Mr. Smith, 40 hours for Mrs. Jones, 43 hours for that hard-working Mr. Miller, 39 hours for Misty Johnson, and 41 hours for Mr. West. With these additional records, we should be able to perform some interesting queries and sorts. Before we do, click on the Save icon again. Now let's explore some of Excel's most effective database tools. Databases are great for organizing your data, but their real power comes when you want to find specific records. Suzanne, click on the Personnel tab. We're going to search the data table for everyone in the administration department. Of course, with only 5 records, you can figure that out just by looking at the screen. But it would certainly take a little longer if there were 500, wouldn't it? Let's do our search. One of the cells within the database must be selected, so click on one of them now. Once done, pull down the Data menu and select the Form option. You'll notice that the data form now informs us that there are 5 records in the personnel data table. The data form has 2 basic operations. The first, the records entry mode, allows us to add, delete, or restore deleted records within the data table. The second, search criteria, allows us to specify criteria to search for specific records. The form window and its commands button change for each operation. Right now we are in the data entry mode, so we see the new and delete buttons. If we stayed in this mode, we could type another employee's record into the field entry boxes, and that record would be added to the data table. We have enough records for now, so let's see how the search criteria operation works. Click on the criteria button, Suzanne. As soon as we click on the button, the field boxes are emptied, and the operation buttons change to reflect that we are now in search criteria mode. You'll notice that the heading above the buttons reads Criteria. Also notice that the Criteria button has become the Form button. The button allows us to toggle between the data entry and search criteria operations.
Professor, what exactly is criteria?
Criteria is the general name given to the statements describing the records we want to find. For a database, the criteria must be structured to match the structure of the database. That's how the search works. Suzanne, let's use the form to find records for everyone in the administration department. To do so, we'll use the department field to specify this criterion. Click in the department field, Suzanne, and type admin. This is a very simple search, but let's see how it works before we go on to more complicated criteria. Now click on the Find Next button, and Excel looks for the first record after Sam Smith's that contains admin in its department field. Misty Johnson now appears in the form because her record matches our criteria. The Find Records command accomplishes this by comparing the entered criteria to the records in the data table. Click on the Find Next button again, and nothing happens. Misty is record 4 of 5, and there are no more administration personnel listed after her. Click on Find Prev, that's for Previous, and there's Sam again. He is the other employee in the administration department. Pretty easy, isn't it? Let's try a little more complicated search and learn how to combine criteria. Let's search for everyone in the sales department who earns $10 an hour or less. First, click on the Criteria Form button to switch operations. Then, click on the Clear button to clear out the current criteria listing, Suzanne. We'll start with a clean slate. For the first part of this multiple criteria search, click in the Department field and type in the word Sales. Now for the second criterion. Click in the Rate field. We need to enter a criteria that describes earning of $10 an hour or less. And to do that, we need to enter a comparison operator such as a greater than or less than sign, an equal sign, or a combination of these symbols. Type the less than symbol. That's the shift plus the comma key, Suzanne. Now type an equal sign and then type 10. This is symbolic language for less than or equal to 10. Click on the Find Next button. There's Joan. Her record matches our criterion. She's in the sales department and she earns exactly $10 an hour. Click on the Find Next button and there's Ben, who is also in sales, and he earns $9, so his record also matches our criteria. Another click on the Find Next button produces only a beep because there are no more records matching these conditions. Click on the Close button to close the dialog box. The form is one of several ways to select records within a data table. We'll see some of the others a little later in the lesson. For now, click on the Save icon before we move on. Suzanne, let's take a look at reorganizing, or in database terminology, sorting some records. To sort records, we select one or more data table fields. A selected field is called a sort key. For example, within a phone list, we might designate the area code field as a sort key. Sorting the data within this field will reorganize the data table's records. We can sort in ascending order or descending order. Sorts can be based on numeric, alphabetic, or alphanumeric data. Let's see how it works. The first step in any sort operation is selecting the data table to be sorted. And of our two data tables, I believe the personnel table will provide us with the best illustration of just how useful and easy sorting can be. Pull down the data menu and then select the sort command. It is at the top of the list. The commands within this dialog box allow us to tell Excel exactly how we want to reorganize the database. Suzanne, click on the drop-down arrow attached to the Sort By entry box. The drop-down list displays our fields, last name, first name, and so on. Let's base our sort on the information within the department field. Click on that title. The department field will be our primary key, which means Excel will recognize the data table using this key first. Then, if any other sort keys are designated, they will constitute a secondary sort. The two options, ascending and descending, that are located right of the key field, allow us to specify the order our data is reorganized within the selected field. The default is ascending order. You know, ABC or 1, 2, 3, progressing in a normal forward manner. Whereas descending is the opposite, CBA or 3, 2, 1, a reverse listing. Make sure the ascending order is selected. Before we sort the data table, check the My List Has area at the bottom of the dialog box. We want the header row option active here, so its field names are available to define the sort process. The option also excludes the header row from being read as a record. Suzanne, click on OK to resort in ascending order the data within the department field. Our records are in a new order without any rekeying. Notice that the department field now has the two administration personnel at the top of the list. They are followed by the sales personnel. This matches our sort key and selected order. You'll also notice the records remain intact no matter what order we sort them. Let's do another sort, but before we do, take a mental picture of how the last names are arranged, especially the two administration records. Pull down the data menu and then select the sort command. Once the sort box appears, open the second sort key window. Then select the last names field. When you finish, make sure the ascending button is selected. With the current choices, we are telling Excel to sort the data table first in ascending order using the data within the department field, then in ascending order using the data within the last name field. Let's see how adding a secondary sort affects the way our records are organized. Click on the OK button, Suzanne.
Professor, why aren't the last names in ascending order?
Remember, the primary sort key takes priority over second or third sort keys. It sorted the data within the department field first. This is the primary key. Then sorted the data within last name field, our secondary key. Looking at the entries within the department field, we can see the administration department still comes before the sales department. Now look at the last name fields. The last names within the administration department are in ascending order, and the names in the sales department are in ascending order. But each department is alphabetized separately. Let's change our primary and secondary sort keys once again. Pull down the data menu so you can select the sort command again. Now pull down the first sort key list and then click on last name. We'll make this field our primary key, and we want it in ascending order. With that done, select the rate field in the second sort key area. We also want it in ascending order, so make sure that button is selected. Then click on the OK button. The data table now lists the records by last names in ascending alphabetical order. You'll also notice that the rate data is in no particular order. However, if we had two Millers in the data table, the Miller with the lower rate would appear first. Pretty simple, isn't it? No matter what order you put your records into the list, you are only a click away from rearranging them according to your needs. Now let's look at selecting specific records using Excel query tools. We've seen how to create data tables, add new records, and sort data. It's time to learn how to select specific information from within a data table. The process for pulling information out of a database is called a query, and it is quite literally a process of asking questions in the language of the database structure. We saw one example of how this works when we entered criteria in the data form. For this query, we'll use Excel's data filters. First, we must select a data table. Switch to the payroll sheet and then click on one cell within the data table. Once done, pull down the data menu and then choose the filter command. When its submenu appears, select the auto filter command. Each field header now has a pull-down arrow attached to it. These are called filters. We'll use them to ask questions of the payroll data table. We'll start with a simple one. Which employee or employees were paid overtime on the June 16th payroll? We'll use the date field to select only the June 16th records. Click on the filter arrow attached to the date field header. This little menu offers several choices. Excel lists the most frequent entries within the selected field, as well as provides other commands that allow us to query the data table. Click on the June 16th date filter listing. Take a look at the row numbers, Suzanne. You'll notice that the row numbers jump from 4 to 10. This means the records in rows 5 through 9 don't match our query filter criteria. Using the autofilter is a pretty simple process and yet a very powerful tool. As you add filters, the list gets smaller and smaller. Now that we've filtered the data table for the June 16th payroll, let's filter those records further for the employees that were paid overtime on the 16th. Pull down the Hours filter arrow. For this part of the filter, we'll need a comparison operator to tell Excel to select only those records that have over 40 hours. And to do that, we must select the Custom option. Click on it, Suzanne. Once the Custom Filter dialog box appears, pull down the drop-down list that appears under the Hours abbreviation. This is the Comparison Operators list. We want to filter records that have greater than 40 hours in them, so click on the greater than sign Operator title. We have the first part of our custom filter. Now let's select the other part. Pull down the criterion list attached to the entry box to the right of the first criteria entry box. Once it is open, click on the number 40 to enter the second part of the custom filter. With that done, click on OK or press your Enter key. The records for Ben Miller and Joe West are the only ones left in the data table because they are the only records that match the criteria set in the filters: June 16th payroll and hours over 40, overtime hours. Now let's expand this query to include all June 16th payroll records that have over 40 hours, plus those records with less than 40 hours. Click on the Hours filter arrow and choose the Custom option again. There is no greater than or less than option listed in the comparison list, so we need to add another criterion to the current greater than 40 selection. To do this, we'll use the OR command. It's one of the options listed between the operator entry boxes, and tells Excel to use criteria in the first and second entry boxes for selecting records. The OR option tells Excel to use either the first or second criteria, but not both. Click on the OR radio button and then open the second criterion list. From it, select the less than operator title. Once done, click on the entry box to the right and enter 40. In the boxes to the right, you can select from the list or type in some other criterion. This will select all records within the June 16th payroll that are above or below 40 hours. Click on OK. We have one more record that matches our filter criteria. Misty Johnson joins Ben and Joe because she worked less than 40 hours. Jones and Smith are not shown because their hours are exactly 40, and therefore are not in the criteria we asked for. Now let's perform a slightly more complex query. Let's track the net wages in both pay periods that were paid to the employees who make more than $7.50 an hour, but less than $13 an hour that were paid overtime. Before we do this, let's add subtotals to the payroll deduction and pay fields. This way we can track how each query affects the subtotals. Click in F15 and then click on the Auto Sum button. Press your Enter key and then use the fill handle to copy the Auto Sum function into the remaining pay and deduction fields. With that accomplished, pull down the Hour Filter menu and select the All option. This will cancel the criteria we have set up in this field. Do the same thing for the Date field. You'll notice the subtotals change as more records are revealed. With all the records back on screen, we have close to $4,000 in regular pay and almost $3,500 in net pay. Now let's do our query. Pull down the filter list for the Rate field and then click on the Custom option. Open up the Comparison list and click on the greater than sign operator title and then press your Tab key. Open up the list and select $7.50. We're going to add another aspect to our criteria. In this case, we want both criteria, so make sure the AND option is toggled on. Pull down the second comparison operator list and select the less than sign. Press your Tab key, then type 13 into the entry box. With that done, click on OK so the filters can do their job. The records we are left with are Joan Jones, Ben Miller, and Misty Johnson for each pay period. Also note how the query affected our subtotals. We still need to query for overtime, so let's do that next. Pull down the Hours Filter menu again, and then click on the Custom option. With the Custom dialog box on screen, select the greater than operator title from the comparison list. And in the entry box, enter 40. Either by choosing that number from the drop-down list or by simply typing in the number. When you finish, click on OK. Now the list is shorter yet. The filtered list should display Joan and Misty's June 9th records, plus Ben's June 16th record. Also notice that the subtotals recalculated for the records displayed. The gross pay for these three records should be $1,328.50. Net pay should be $1,081.87. Well, we've come to the end of this lesson, Suzanne. Before we leave, let's clear the data filters. Pull down the Data menu and open the Filter submenu. Once it's open, click on the Auto Filter option to deactivate that option. With the filters off, all the payroll records came back on screen. Feel free to experiment with other queries and sorts using this data table. Mix up the fields and try various criteria and comparison operators. You now have the rationale and database skills to build almost any kind of data table. Thanks for being such good students. And remember, there is more you can learn from me, the Video Professor.